Hi, and welcome back to the GEFI Insights Series with Asset TV. I'm Amy Clarke. I am the co-founder and Chief Impact Officer at Tribe Impact Capital, and I also have the deep privilege of sitting on the Global Steering Committee of the Global Ethical Finance Initiative. Today we are going to be talking about the just transition. It's London Climate Action Week, so it's a great opportunity for us to deep dive into everything about the just transition, everything from human rights to social inclusion, and obviously the much needed task of promoting and continuing to deliver on sustainable development. This is the second in the series. We were joined earlier this year by Planet Tracker, by Carbon Tracker, and by Mercer's, and hopefully you will have all had the opportunity to view and hopefully comment actually on that fantastic discussion that we had. But as I said today, it's really focused on the climate transition and thinking about the role of finance in that. So I am so excited to be joined by two fantastic representatives from two very, very well-known organizations. Carmen and Lauren, I'm going to let you both introduce yourselves rather than me do that. Carmen, I'm going to come to you first. Would you like to just explain a little bit about you, your institution, and your role there?
Yeah, sure. Very happy to be here, first of all. Thank you so much. So my name is Carmen Cheng. I am the Head of Sustainability and Propositions at NatWest Commercial and Institution. So I'm responsible for the climate initiatives of the commercial and institution part of the bank. So including initiatives such as climate transition plan, climate strategy, and climate propositions. So at NatWest, we really believe in the importance of just transition as we evaluate and assess how we incorporate those just transition considerations into our climate and sustainability strategy. We really believe that the financial institutions will have a big role to play in this to drive the social and also like climate outcomes as well. And we believe that NatWest, being one of the leading UK bank with 19 million customers and with our business operations spanning across retail, commercial and private wealth markets as well, we really believe that we're really well placed to do that.
Brilliant, thank you, Carmen. And we'll come back to some of what NatWest are doing because, as you said, there's a significant footprint in the UK which provides for some really interesting and exciting opportunities. Lauren.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. My name is Lauren Halpin and I work for Martin Currie, the active investment house up in that's based predominantly up in Edinburgh. I have the deep pleasure to head the Impact Equities team at Martin Currie, which is the newest of Martin Currie's investment teams. And what we do is the sort of our flagship fund is Improving Society, the Improving Society strategy. And really at its core, we look to provide broad-based social impact by investing in listed equities. And you can't provide a strategy like that where you get people to the starting line in life, allow them to actualize, and you can't sort of leave them hanging when thinking about the future. So one of the important pillars of impact in our strategy is supporting a just transition. We firmly believe that the just transition will continue, whether it might be 2 steps forward or 1 step back, who knows, but the trajectory is forward. And what we're trying to do as an investment house, and specifically the strategy is to not leave people behind on that journey through investing in really interesting companies with products and services that are allowing people to continue to economically actualize during this period of change.
I'll come back to you on that because obviously a fundamental tenet of the just transition is around social inclusion and ensuring that this isn't done to people, it's done with people. So really want to dive into that a little bit more. But Carmen, I'm going to come back to you. Obviously, we've just spoken about the size of the footprint that NatWest has in the UK. Let's just focus a little bit more on sort of just the financed emissions, your financing activities. Now, you've pledged to become net zero by 2050. Big question, how are you doing that?
Yeah, so there are many layers of it, right? So I think first of all, is like you said, is setting a really kind of ambitious target. So we kind of aim to be the leading UK bank to address this climate challenge and the just transition challenge. And then so like you said, we set the net zero target for 2050 and on the finance emissions and also our asset under management as well, and also our own operations, I think, which is very important that we need to kind of get our house in order. to start with. And then we also have 100 billion sustainable funding targets. And we've actually, against that, we've actually achieved 68 billion already as of March 24. And also we have targets such as having 50% of our mortgage customers to achieve EPC rating C or better by 2030. So it's very interesting, Lauren, what you said about kind of bringing people along as well, is actually to achieve that target is very easy if we just basically don't continue the relationship with our customers with the EPC rating worse than EPC C, for example. But actually, what we have to do is to bring them along to see how we can help them to achieve that target. So that's why we try to incorporate that consideration into that as well. And the other thing I want to also mention is just transition and climate is like, as you say, we have a target by 2050, 2030. It's more like an endurance sport. Kind of, you might not see like the result immediately, but actually you have to keep going year on year. So that's why we have, for example, since 2021, we've set up our Climate Centre of Excellence. In 2022, we have our energy transition team being set up, targeting the structuring and financing of transition, like energy transition technologies. We published our climate transition plan in 2023. And then this year, we just rolled out our climate decisioning framework as an assessment tool for us. And then the other thing I also want to mention is with our footprint in the country, for example, it is a privilege and also important to use our influence and to make a joint effort with the industry to form a bigger team together, to be part of a bigger movement. So we play a very active role at the Transition Plan Task Force, so to basically work together with the industry players to make sure that we have a consistent way to look at transition plan. We are a founding member of GFANS, for example, and we joined a lot of different organizations such as Net Zero Banking Association, the SMI, and also Bankers for Net Zero, for example, just to make sure they were all joining forces to make a big impact.
I love the analogy of climate finance being an endurance sport. And you alluded to something else as well, which to a certain degree feels slightly antithetical to the culture in finance, which is it's also a team sport, because none of us can do this by ourselves. You know, we have to collaborate, we have to partner for the changes. You know, Lauren, you're managing equities, you're managing businesses, but you are one of many shareholders within those businesses, and you're also managing for what we would often refer to in the industry as an intersectional theory of change. So you've got climate and you've got social inclusion, and you're managing that all together. Just talk to us a little bit about how you do that and how decarbonisation sort of factors into the strategy that you have, but also the conversations alongside the other conversations, obviously, that you're having around social mobility and social inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, that's a big question, but to kind of hone in on the idea of how decarbonisation fits within the strategy, you know, we at Martin Currie, all of the investment teams embed stewardship and sustainability work with the analysts and the portfolio managers. You know, it's not something that kind of comes to us on high from a central function that says Martin Currie must vote like this. It views, I mean, you know, there are central tenets that we hold dear, but it very much gives the responsibility to the practitioners. And I think that really puts us in an interesting place in order to understand this intersectionality and also to understand how companies are able to impact for better or for worse on this decarbonization journey, and also on social justice. So there's a lot of moving parts, but I think the ownership, the fact that my team of PMs and analysts owns that journey, it really kind of makes it a day-to-day thing that we're sort of knee-deep in, along with the balance sheets, along with the speaking to management about strategy and things like that. But so kind of getting back to decarbonization specifically, that's a really, really key issue that we look at right across the board at Martin Currie when it comes to our investment analysis. So we don't see the classic ESG as being an additive to investment analysis. It is simply good analysis, and it really forms some of the key risks and opportunities that we would identify for myriad companies in our portfolios.
You spoke there about agency, and Carmen, obviously you spoke about that through the language of collaboration, and I think agency is such an important word. It's often overused, I think, out in the marketplace, but it is such an important word when we think about what our individual agency, whether it is literally at the individual level, me as Amy, or at the company level, Tribe, Martin Curry, NatWest, but then also our collective agency, what we're able to do with others, and how we inspire others as well, through learning and sharing the lessons that we've learned, things that we've failed on as well, sharing not just our successes but also our failures. I want to come back to you, Carmen, because obviously there's this huge commitment sitting right at the heart of NatWest now, and as a sustainability practitioner, it's often seen as your role to sort it all out. You get to sort of say what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And you were obviously referring earlier to the mortgage innovation that NatWest has put in place. How does that sustainability sort of proposition landscape in support of net zero work? How are you inspiring, everybody in NatWest to sort of to support and lean in? And how are you creating those pools of agency within NatWest as well?
Yeah, so we have, as I said before, it's important to get our house in order, first of all, and I think you have to walk the talk. So I think that's important, and then we have a sustainability network for our employees as well, for them to come together, discuss sustainability practices at home or at work, etc. So that is the agency point, but also with the spread of our business spreading across retail and commercial and private wealth as well, I think is the importance is also to enable our customers, to empower them with the tools and information as well. So in terms of our sustainability propositions as well, we have, for example, in retail, we have over 800,000 customers who've used our retail app on the on the mobile retail app, for example, and we have designed something called the Home Energy Hub. That is basically like an online portal for the homeowners to go to the website to actually look at what are the efficiency savings that they could have on their home, and also bring together the trusted tradesmen and the financing options, including grants for the users as well. And it's important to actually note that is not just available to our customers, it's actually available to everyone. And we have a very similar tool as well for SMEs called the Carbon Planner, which is a tool to use for the business to use to estimate their carbon footprint, and also with suggestion of actions to how to reduce the emission. And again, that is talking to the empowerment and the tool for the customers. And that is all designed by our colleagues who is basically feel again empowered and able to do that, to help our customer to do that. So it's not just about us telling our customers what to do. And the other point about collaboration as well is we have a lot of partnerships with different businesses to address that together in the market as well. So we have partnerships with the likes of Solar, Diode, etc. that help us to develop solar and EV solutions for our customers. And we also have, like, for example, 1-year partnership with WWF to really kind of promote the sustainability practices for the food and the agriculture sectors. We partner with Tesco and McCain's to provide financing solutions to help the farmers to move towards sustainable farming practices. And I think that is a very good example as well, just to show that actually we bring the social as well as the climate aspect into what we do as well, because to finance farmers, we need to think about not just short-term, but medium-term financing. So in a normal banking kind of risk appetite perspective, it might not be that attractive, but if we take the social aspect into account, actually we need to bring the farmers along to make sure that we help them, the whole sector to transition. So I think that is something that we do a lot as well to encourage that collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking the language of stakeholder engagement, which is massive. And stakeholder engagement and stakeholder aligned governance is it's a very big conversation out there at the moment. And obviously as a B Corporation, it would be remiss of me not to say that we are ultimately very supportive of that. Lauren, I want to come to you because obviously the fund that you're managing is anchored in the premise of social inclusion and social mobility, but through obviously the additional lens of decarbonisation as well, you've got that anchored in. How are you making sure that the decisions that you are making in terms of the equities that you do invest in, that they themselves understand what needs to be done with people,
yes,
with their clients, their customers, their employees, their suppliers, for example, rather than to them? How does that work in principle? I'd really love to understand it a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's from improving society's perspective, there's sort of two lenses that we look through in an attempt to answer that question. The first is that the way that we measure impact in the fund, the way that we are able to, as authentically as possible, we are learning and growing all the time, to say we are impacting these populations is through the products and services that our companies are providing. So we look for innovative products and services from well-governed companies that are out there kind of answering some of the big questions, improving well-being, improving inclusion, and supporting a just transition. And so because we come at the actual sort of impact measurement from the products and services angle, there is already an economic incentive for companies to want to grow that cone of impact because it will be good for their bottom line. Most of the companies that we are engaged with, the vast majority that we invest in tend to be sort of pure play, one or two or a small collection of products where they really know their customer well. And again, they're kind of knee deep in that story of the long-term product growth and what that will do in terms of good out there in the world. So we tend to be quite aligned on that front, and that is a very, very important sort of prerequisite before you can even start to talk to me about management or profit margin or any of that sort of thing. So that's the first lens, is that the companies that we're looking at are sort of automatically aligned on that growing the impact journey. Coming at it more from a traditional sort of governance and stewardship and sustainability perspective, and looking at the corporate behaviors, what we do is, again, we run a very sort of concentrated portfolio, 20 to 35 names, and we are with these companies on a long-term journey in terms of objective-based engagement, whether that is just our team or whether that is more collaborative. And what we are very interested in knowing is how companies define materiality. It's sometimes easy for a low carbon intensive company to say, oh, well, here's the plan and we're going to do this, but what really matters to us is over here. And it's like, fine, your emissions in absolute sense aren't enormous, fine. But what have you decided is material within that small number? And what are you doing to make sure that up and downstream are engaged along with you? So how are you working with your customers? How are you working with suppliers? What are you doing in terms of development of contracts, and putting down hard lines for supplier behaviors? What are you doing in terms of making sure that the projects that you're working on, whether it's using offsets or whether it's direct involvement in reducing carbon emissions in your business, what are you doing to make sure and measure the impact on people? I mean, you said these things often happen to people, and they often happen to people in potentially less advantaged areas. There's the whole the body of research on are we impacting the global South overwhelmingly with some of these practices? What are you doing to make sure that those people are brought along on the journey? Because it's incumbent on us as capital allocators from both our customers' perspectives and our investments perspectives to make sure that we are not leaving people behind on this journey. And it really comes down to having the mindset going in we genuinely believe that investing for impact and return is achievable, and it is what we should be doing. Having that mindset going in to engagements with corporates puts you in a great perspective to help them understand and to actually get some really high quality information so that going forward we can say, last year you talked about this, how are you thinking about materiality now? How are you thinking about the use of offsets? Whatever it may be, because this is a long-term journey. And the way that we essentially bottom line come at it is this is a relationship, multi-year, in order to make sure that this happens.
Mm. It's so interesting you talk about relationship, because we spend a lot of time at GEFI talking about the difference between transactions and relationships. And I think when we look into finance and we look into how some of the cultural aspects of finance over many decades have very much been anchored far more in the principle of transaction rather than relationship. And I think when we think about the just transition and we think about the need to decarbonise and the scale and the speed with which we need to do this, we have to stop transacting and start relating. We've got to understand the stories that are at play within our portfolios. And this is incredibly important when we're talking about, for example, social mobility, but also when we're talking about the impact that it has on customers, like you were saying, the farmers as well. You know, we have to be willing to a certain degree to sort of slow ourselves down a little bit in order to speed ourselves up. We've got to get much more familiar with who we're talking with, why we're talking with them, on what we are engaging them, but also understanding what needs to be done to facilitate and mobilize their goodwill, their agency out into whatever it is that we believe is the problem as well. And that's a very different type of skill set, I think. I just want to come quickly to you both to ask the slightly thorny question, which is the one I always dread when somebody asks me. But I want to ask the slightly thorny question of, how are you measuring success against your sort of stated ambitions? And Carmen, I'm going to come to you first. How are you measuring it?
There are different ways of matrix, because like I said, it's endurance sports in a sense that actually, you know, you can keep going, but you don't see the results yet. You know that your target is further down the line. How can you make sure that you are on track, right? So I think it's very important to first of all, customer feedback is very important. We put our customers in the center of everything that we do. So like you said, we are first and foremost a relationship bank. So we make sure that we are, rather than transacting, we actually have a proper relationship with our customers to understand their needs. So customer feedback is very key to us. The other way of measuring success is to enable that measurement. First of all, we need a good tool to measure it. So that's why we're very involved in the climate transition plan work. And that's why, as I said, we play a really active role in the transition plan task force to make sure that we have the right matrix to do that. So how we measure success is, you know, we set ourselves a target in terms of moving towards that net zero target. And it's just how we kind of move towards that. And like you said, sometimes we might have to slow ourselves down to speed up. So we to accept the fact that actually life is not a straight line curve of your emission here and then going down to net zero here. We might have to help our customers so that actually our finance emission might have to go up for a bit before it comes down, but actually, you know, making sure that we are ultimately on the right trajectory. So I think there is a bit of an acknowledgement of that as well. And I think if you speak to a lot of the industry kind of participants, you will know the data is a big issue. So that's something we need to work on to enable us to kind of measure that as well. So we set ourselves milestones every year to make sure that we're on the right track, but at the same time also evaluate whether actually we're on the right course. And I think it's important to have the agile mindset to be prepared to change tack to make sure that actually are we still going towards the right end goal. I think that is very important as well. It's like, you know, like I said, I use this analogy a lot in this interview. It's like running a marathon. You need to think about your next steps before you did the very end goal. So I think making sure that we have those milestones instead, and again, putting customer in the center of our decision.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you've hit on a really important point here, is that It is a journey. I always hate it when people say that. You think, oh, someone said it again, it's a journey. But it is a journey, but it's a marathon. But it's almost like a marathon of sprints. It's every sort of 20 minutes we've got to then kind of check in and work out where we are and whether we're still kind of on the trajectory to what it is that we have ultimately set ourselves. But also be willing to interrogate whether or not the ultimate goal that we've set ourselves is still the right goal as well. So there's that agility and flexibility, I think, that's really important. Lauren, how are you measuring success?
Yeah, absolutely. We're not sure if we're measuring it very well at the minute, and I think it goes to some of what both you and Carmen have said, in that, there's imperfections in the data. This is a long-term job, and but what we've sort of come down to is progress with introspection. Don't let perfection get in the way of that progress. And so what we have started to do is, at its heart, in terms of our fund's ethos and our fund's measurement, is social equity. So equality of opportunity and outcome. And the way that we're getting at outcome is by thinking of our portfolio as an anthology of short stories. Each company tells the story of the impact that it's having out there in the world through company-specific impact key performance indicators. And one of our promises to the market is that on a yearly basis in our impact report, we report progress against each and every one of those KPIs for each and every one of the companies. Where is that good? That's a step forward in terms of reporting versus some of the more traditionally minded sustainable investment products that try to sort of migrate up to portfolio level outcomes. We struggle with that. We find granularity is important right now. Where does it potentially fall short? Going back to that equity equation, equality of opportunity and outcome, we sometimes have to use proxies for the outcomes. It's the data piece, right? It's going from how many people visit the app to, in your case, to how much does that save your average household in energy bills or whatever it is. We are good at figuring out how many people visit the app, how many diagnostic tests are sold, how many affordable housing units are delivered. Is R&D tracking as a percentage of sales as a proxy for future growth? We're good at all of that. But the more personal outcome stories, we are still struggling with in terms of delivering that as like a performance indicator. And it's one of the things that we work with companies on in terms of trying to come up with ways for disclosure in those areas. But this is the imperfect path that we're on, and we're very excited about it, and we're really excited about what it's going to evolve into over time as disclosure and relationships between us and our investment companies become better.
I completely agree. I mean, we inhabit a very imperfect world. And we have to be comfortable, I think, sometimes with ambiguity. We have to be comfortable with uncertainty. We have to be comfortable with things that can't be measured accurately yet. We don't know how to measure them, but that should not preclude us from doing what we know is right. As I said to somebody once famously, who was arguing that if you absolutely cannot measure it, then you shouldn't be focused on it. It effectively had no value. And I asked him if he was married, and he said yes. And I said, how much do you love your wife? And he just said a lot. And I said, no, give me a number. Some things just aren't actually really genuinely designed to be measured the way that we think about measurement in finance. You mentioned offsets. And that in and of itself is a much bigger conversation, a separate conversation. There are controversies at the moment out in the marketplace with regards to the use of offsets, what type of offsets, for example. We've seen some other controversies around, Science-Based Target Initiative, for example, potentially shifting position. Again, that's a completely separate conversation. But we've also seen, and again, it would be remiss of me not to say this ahead of obviously the phenomenal amount of activity that's going to be going on this week through London Climate Week, that Ember recently released some information around the scale and the pace of the transition, and focusing really on the growth of solar and wind in its capacity to provide energy. So solar has taken 8 years to get from 100 terawatt hours of provision to 1,000 wind 12. Now, if you compare that to gas at 28, coal at 32 and hydro at 39 years, it just gives you an indication as to the scale of change that is happening out in the marketplace. And we know it's imperfect. We've spoken about some of the imperfections. It's not easy, and you are having to juggle a lot of different stakeholder needs, thinking about agency as well, bringing others into the conversation. You mentioned stories, Lauren. I'm going to ask you, what is the next chapter in your story, sort of when you think about the next 12 to 18 months? What are the things that you are most excited about, or the things that you think are likely to happen that are going to be sort of the most material?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I'm most excited about that scale, the scale of the change, and the fact that, in my day-to-day, I'm mostly involved with speaking to corporates and those listed on equity indexes, and the fact that there's no longer that burden to, in vast majority of cases, convince them to go on this journey. They are on this journey. They are acting in a way that is decarbonizing, and again, imperfect, but we're moving forward, and that is just exceptionally exciting. And if you think about the collective economic power, the collective dollar power of these large-scale listed equities for going out and creating change and working with their suppliers and working with their customer bases. And you just get to the feeling that we are on the cusp of sort of just that positive, or actually negative feedback loop, where it just keeps going and going. And the cone of change just keeps getting broader and broader. So I am just excited to see targets being put in place, robust targets. To your point, they can't just be, wet blankets. Robust targets from some of the biggest companies, the most important companies in the world. It's exciting. What I would temper my excitement with, maybe this is me being my own wet blanket, I am very excited about the pace of change. I want to see, again, that focus on materiality, on remembering that people and stakeholder groups need education. They need to be worked with, not talked at. And so I am excited to see the ways in which the big corporate players and even the little guys are out there taking people on their journeys with them and making sure that it's maybe this is cheesy, but that everyone remembers that there's people at the end of this. We are doing this to protect the next generation, but we have a lot of people that need to be brought on the journey today as well. And it's a huge challenge. And I'm very excited about the progress. I just want people to remember that kind of fundamental thing. We all need to bear this, and one group can't be expected to bear more than the other.
Absolutely, hear, hear. Carmen.
Yes, so I think, first of all, that's really, really reassuring statistics that you just showed us. So thanks for bringing us the good news. So I think what I'm excited about is probably, I don't think we have seen, I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. Mm-hmm. I think actually more changes is going to come. And then that's very exciting. And it's going to change faster than we thought. Right, so I think what I'm most exciting about is actually when we published a report last year with BCG on the energy transition opportunities, and just looking at the energy supply side, we estimated that there's about 900 billion in the UK. Mm-hmm. So it's actually about, rather than crisis management, which is, yes, that's the case, but actually there's opportunities as well. So, in Chinese, actually, we have a word that is crisis and opportunities. They share the same word, mm-hmm. same character. So in crisis, we can turn them into opportunities. I think, there should be optimism in there to turn that into opportunities. And particularly with renewables and, like you said, solar and wind, I think if we can accelerate the electrification and with the grid and the battery and everything, actually is probably responsible for 75% of the global emission if you take into account electrification of transport and heating and industries, etc. So, and that unlocks so much more opportunities for the rest of the society. And then also is, I'm hoping that what I'm hopeful in the next 12 to 18 months also is the collaboration, not just within the industry we talked about a lot now, but also with the policymakers as well. And, imagine how much, the easier planning process can unlock so much, in the electrification, for example. Then I'm hoping that there will be more of those collaboration, and that will even just basically making that impact even more exponential than you just talked about.
Absolutely. Carmen, Lauren, thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy. I could sit here for another hour quite happily and continue to chat with you. I think we've spoken so much about so many things, and I always appreciate these are little snapshots into both of your worlds. But I think, agency, collaboration is such a key message coming out of this. And I think just thinking about what you've just said, Carmen, around, crisis and opportunity wear the same clothes. They're just different sides of the coin. Somebody once said to me years ago, risk is just unmanaged opportunity for those who know how to flip it to an opportunity. There's a wonderful African proverb: if you want to run fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I think, agency and collaboration are absolutely critical, I think, tenets of an approach to a just transition. We have to do this together. We have to make sure that it's not done to people, it's done with people. To your point, Lauren, we keep a very, very sort of weather eye on the horizon, and the horizon is a just and an inclusive society that lives within the boundaries that have been set by nature. I think that's really, really important that we just keep our eye on that as well. And storytelling, exactly to your point, Carmen, this is a marathon. This is intergenerational. We are not going to create all the change that we need to in our lifetimes. And given, the point around agency and stakeholder engagement, we have to work with everybody within our value chains. And that's where stories, I think, really matter, because we have to know that we can work together for the long term. This isn't a transaction. I've got to sit beside you two for the next 25 years working on this. So I need to know who you are, and you need to know who I am, in order to get that, that momentum behind what it is that we're doing. So I think, those are some of the things that I've taken away from this incredibly rich and I think, such an important conversation. And I think lastly, to your point, Carmen, as well, innovation. We've got to be willing to think outside of what we deem to be the normal response, because we are not in normal times. So innovation is a currency that we've really got to, I think, embrace. So hopefully for everybody listening, that has been very insightful. It's been thought-provoking. It's given you a lot to think about as well. As I said, it's London Climate Week, so I hope that you are all going to have had an opportunity to really engage in some of the great content and the great learning that is going to come out of that. We hope that you have found this incredibly helpful. As I said, it's the GEFI Insights Series. There will be a few of them coming up after this fantastic conversation on the just transition with Carmen and Lauren. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we really look forward to welcoming you back for the next one.